Deep within the Scandinavian wilderness, where icy winds pierced to the bone and snow concealed all tracks, an ominous sound echoed. It was not a triumphant march, but a funeral dirge, foreshadowing a tragic fate. On a snow-covered arena, under the stern gaze of the chieftain, stood Jorgen the Viking, a renowned warrior, now branded a traitor. Grave accusations hung over him, and the Jarl, without hesitation, ordered justice to be carried out with his gleaming sword. But fate had something else in store for Jorgen, an unexpected turn that would forever change his life. Chained to the ground, his soul consumed by shame, Jorgen awaited his inevitable death. The weight of condemnation pressed upon him, as if the world had turned its back. Every gaze was like a knife thrust, stripping him of his remaining honor. No one, not even the Jarl, suspected that a spark of rebellion still smoldered within Jorgen. In a moment of despair, as the blade neared his neck, a furious rage ignited within him. In a final act of defiance, he dodged the fatal blow. Cries of astonishment were swallowed by the icy wind, and he, branded a traitor, stepped onto the dark path of an outcast. Left to die in the Scandinavian wilderness, Jorgen was granted life, but stripped of his freedom. Wounded and starving, he was cast into a world where only the strongest survive. Hunted not only by wild beasts but also by former comrades, he entered a desperate struggle for survival, but the enemy was not only external. The most dangerous adversary was the pain of the past, the burden of betrayal, and an insatiable thirst for vengeance. Winter gripped the land, and Jorgen's journey became a test of endurance, a quest for truth and redemption. The path of an outcast is thorny and perilous, but with each step, Jorgen drew closer to his goal, to reclaim all he had lost and defy fate itself. Jorgen was born in a harsh land, where long nights and endless winters reigned. His native village, lost amidst snow-covered mountains and icy rivers, lived by its own laws. His parents, simple peasants, were warriors at heart. His father, Eirik, a Viking with a thunderous voice and a blacksmith's hands, inspired awe. His mother, Freya, calm and resilient like a goddess, forged armor for warriors and hunters. From childhood, Jorgen knew harsh reality. Weakness and regret were unforgivable luxuries. At 5, he learned to wield a knife, hunt in the forest, and survive in a world where hunger and cold were more terrifying than any foe. His childhood was filled with struggle, but also with his father's wisdom. Eirik taught him that honor and strength were a man's foremost virtues. Jorgen admired his father, but felt that true greatness required more than mere brute strength. In his teenage years, the pressure became unbearable. At 13, Jorgen first stepped onto the battlefield, where he faced a hostile clan. Blood, screams, and the scent of death shook him, but what struck him most was that, despite all his efforts, he was merely replicating others' actions. War proved not to be an act of bravery, but a prison of fate. He learned to kill, to protect his people, but a longing for something more than endless conflict grew in his heart. At 17, Jorgen became a full member of the Viking clan. He stood out not only for his strength, but also for his strategic mind. He was not just a warrior, but a thinker, knowing when to attack, when to retreat. His name became known far beyond the village, and soon he led war parties. But glory brought no happiness. Every victory left a scar on his soul. He felt like a prisoner of a life filled with violence, awaiting a new battle, a new enemy. Jorgen's true tragedy began when he faced betrayal during a desperate mission to defend a peaceful neighboring village from the invasion of ruthless northern bandits. In the midst of a fierce battle, he was severely wounded and captured by enemies who, by a bitter twist of fate, turned out to be members of a clan once allied with his own. When the exhausted Jorgen was brought before their leader, a man with whom he had shared the glory of many victories, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Consumed by envy of Jörgen's growing strength or seeking to solidify his own position, the clan leader made the fateful decision to dispose of him. In the chaos of battle, as Jörgen tried to recover from captivity, a vile false accusation of treason was leveled against him. A rumor spread that he had secretly negotiated with the enemies to seize power and had intentionally surrendered the village without a fight. This accusation was a death blow. Jörgen knew there wasn't a shred of truth in these words, but the lie was repeated so often that it soon overshadowed reality. His own brothers-in-arms began to look at him with suspicion and disgust. The once revered hero was transformed into a man branded with shame. The Jarl, blinded by false denunciations, ordered Jörgen's execution. His fate seemed sealed. The night before his execution, lying in a damp, cold cell, Jörgen sank into reflection on his life. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his true imprisonment was not the accusation itself, but the realization that he was merely a pawn in someone else's game, over which he had no control. The betrayal was not only that he had been betrayed, but that he had believed he was fighting for something truly important and valuable. His ideals of honor and courage began to crumble, like fragile sand castles, as he confronted the harsh reality of a world where the strongest always prevailed, where loyalty and truth had become ephemeral concepts, easily corrupted by greed and a thirst for power. However, no one, not even those who condemned him to death, suspected that Jörgen's true strength lay not only in his sword, but in his unwavering ability to resist despair. On that cold and silent night, he swore to himself that he would survive at any cost. He understood that even facing death, a spark still smoldered in his heart, one that could be rekindled. A fire burned within him, which, if properly fueled, could incinerate everything around him and unleash fury upon those who had betrayed him. The path to vengeance would be long, arduous, and fraught with deadly trials, but Jörgen had nothing left to lose. He realized that fate had marked him with its seal, but he, in turn, was determined to rewrite history. The morning frost pierced the air like silent poison. The majestic and impassive mountains seemed oblivious to the cries emanating from the distant village where Jörgen had been branded a traitor. His body was exhausted, his muscles aching from the desperate fight for survival, but within him, in the soul of a Viking warrior, the fire of resistance still burned. The blow that should have ended his life missed its mark, and instead of submitting to the sword's cold blade, he took a desperate leap, plunging into the shadow of fate. Now, with his chest aching and curses still ringing in his ears, Jörgen was forced to embark on an even harsher journey, an escape that led him deep into the Scandinavian forest, where even the winds howled like the lament of the dead. The first night after the failed execution became a nightmare forever seared into Jörgen's memory. The cold, like an invisible enemy, sought to consume his soul. Wounds on his neck and chest, inflicted by steel, burned with every movement, but the fear of being caught by a man he once considered a brother drove him forward. He no longer had a home, a village, a hearth. All he had left were the piercing winds and the endless expanse of the frozen forest before him. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't go back. With each step that took him further from the village, he felt himself moving further from his past, from a life filled with honor and respect. Yet at the same time, a sense of liberation began to dawn in his soul. He was alive, and that was all that mattered in that moment. The first few days were shrouded in a fog of pain, fear, and disorientation. Jörgen knew he couldn't afford extended rest. The scent of his blood still hung in the air, and men of his own clan, now relentless hunters, would soon be on his trail. In the forest, he was a stranger, a fugitive with nothing but the echo of his own breath and the crunch of snow beneath his feet. At first, his steps were uncertain, his body constantly racked with pain. The escape was no easy trial. He fled not only from death, but from his own conscience, from the accusations leveled against him, from the shame that now bore an invisible mark upon him. The sky, once a symbol of freedom, now seemed a prison with heavy clouds hanging over him, forming a curtain of ice and wind. In the forest, Jörgen had to become more than a warrior. He had to learn to survive. In the initial days, instincts guided him, but that wasn't enough. He had been taught war, battles, but this war was different. The enemy was not a man with a sword, but the relentless environment itself. Nature knew no mercy, and solitude became his only companion. For hours, he hunted with ever-increasing precision, but cold and hunger tested his strength at every turn. He hunted moose and small game, using the bones of his kills to fashion makeshift tools, and learned to forage for roots and berries beneath the snow, but always lived in constant fear of discovery. Isolation gradually took hold of his soul. The silence of the forest grew deeper, as if nature itself had frozen, awaiting his surrender. The endless winter brought a sense of helplessness, as if time had lost its speed. Jörgen, once facing the world with indomitable courage, now found himself alone, a prisoner of his own mind. Doubts, once alien to a warrior's heart, now permeated his every thought. He began to question his loyalty, his actions, the very essence of his warrior's path. Once a leader and hero to his village, he had become an outcast, lost in a cold and cruel world. The brand of betrayal weighed on him more heavily than the icy cold. He sensed that his struggle would be directed not only against those who betrayed him, but against himself, against the pain that arose from falling into an abyss he had not chosen. For several subsequent months, Jörgen was caught in an endless cycle of survival and introspection. With each passing day, he grew physically stronger, hardened by the harsh conditions of the wild. However, he became increasingly withdrawn and suspicious, sinking deeper into dark thoughts. He knew vengeance was coming, but with each night spent alone in the icy forest, he began to question his motives, wondering if he was driven by true justice or merely a desire to destroy those who had abandoned him. Revenge, once a hot and burning impulse, now seemed a double-edged sword, capable of wounding him as deeply as those who had wronged him. In the midst of his exile, Jörgen confronted an invisible and insidious enemy, his own inner nature. Solitude weighed on him like heavy armor, and long months of estrangement forced him to confront himself, not just the image of a warrior. There were moments when exhaustion made him doubt himself, and he questioned if he could ever return to his homeland, to his people, to the man he had been before his condemnation. The war he waged was not only against the man who betrayed him, but against his own past and the ghosts that haunted him. Exile changed him. The man who was once a leader now saw only a shadow of his former self, and this internal transformation became the hardest battle of all. The vengeance he planned would demand a price: his soul. The pain of betrayal by those he considered brothers gnawed at him from within. 3 years of suffering passed, 3 years during which Jörgen, drifting further from humanity, approached a new destiny. He knew that he would ultimately restore justice, the justice of a man wronged and exiled, but who survived. The man who returned from the depths of the forest, stronger and more determined than ever, was no longer the Jörgen who had been left to fend for himself. He had changed. He now understood that vengeance was not an easy victory, but rather a price to be paid, a price that would define him forever. When he finally left the forest, Jörgen felt no joy. The piercing wind and the gray sky stretching before him were no longer enemies. They now symbolized the strength he had gained, the transformation that had occurred within him. He was ready. The path of vengeance was open, and he would finally be free from the curse that had marked him, not because he had been condemned, but because he had rewritten his own story. The wind cut through the air like a sharp blade as Jörgen walked the snow-covered path toward the village that had exiled him. His boots, now sturdy and heavy, made a distinct crunch on the ice, echoing with each step, a reminder of the long journey he had endured. He was stronger and more resolute. 3 years of exile had tempered his soul, and with the weight of every battle he had fought in the icy forests, he knew the time for vengeance was finally at hand. He was a condemned man and a traitor, but looking at the village that was once his home, he understood that his story was not yet over. Truth, justice, and honor had to be restored, but this would require more than a mere return. He had to challenge the Jarl himself, who had condemned him, and prove his innocence once and for all. Jörgen did not approach the village as a mere fugitive. He returned as a phantom, a shadow from the past, to confront his tormentor. During his 3 years of exile, he had meticulously planned every step, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of his former home and allies. He understood he couldn't simply appear at the Jarl's door and expect to be heard. His vengeance demanded more than words, it demanded action. It demanded that the Jarl see him, recognize him, and face his own condemnation. Jörgen's strategy was clear: a public fight, a duel in which he would prove the falsity of the treason accusation and restore justice. As he strode along the frozen path, Jörgen felt the winter wind whisper sinister secrets and promises of retribution. The majestic trees, stripped of their leafy cover, seemed to watch his every step intently, as if awaiting an inevitable encounter with preordained fate. The harshness of winter constrained Jörgen's every movement, yet at the same time, he felt an unprecedented strength accumulated from years of solitary wandering. He was no longer the youth who had once been banished to these wild forests. Now, before them stood a transformed warrior, hardened by harsh trials, cunning and calculating, driven by a single purpose: to restore his violated honor and punish those who had condemned him to suffering. With each step, an unrelenting drive for justice ignited within his soul, and as the first roofs of his native village appeared on the horizon, Jörgen realized that the hour of the decisive battle was nigh. Upon entering the village territory, Jörgen made no attempt to conceal his presence. He understood that his arrival would not go unnoticed. He stopped in the very center of the main square, directly in front of the Jarl's magnificent house, where his tragic fate had once been sealed. Gusts of wind lashed his face, and his black cloak billowed behind him like an ominous shadow, heralding the outcast's return. For a moment, he paused, surveying the land that once belonged to him but now seemed foreign and distant, as if time had erased all ties connecting him to this place. Then he raised his voice, low and firm, yet filled with unprecedented power. "I am Jörgen, the traitor you condemned to certain death. I have not come to beg for mercy. I have come to demand the justice that was dishonorably denied me." His words, clear and piercing, instantly echoed throughout the village. The villagers, gripped by horror from the tales they had heard of him, froze in stunned silence, but their fear did not last long. The Jarl, seated on his throne, skillfully crafted from wood and iron, heard Jörgen's furious speech and, as expected, was not intimidated. He was a proud and arrogant man, and the thought that the accusation of treason could be false had never crossed his mind. However, he could not ignore the fact that Jörgen stood before him, alive and defiant, challenging his authority in front of all the people. The Jarl understood that his authority was under threat, and like any self-respecting ruler, he could not allow his dominion to be challenged without a response. Thus began the battle between two men, one craving justice, the other desperately clinging to his power. The challenge was accepted. Jörgen and the Jarl, standing face to face under the watchful eyes of the villagers, prepared for a deadly struggle. Jörgen, though stronger and more resilient than ever before, understood that victory would not be easy. The Jarl was a mighty warrior with vast experience, and the power of his position gave him a significant advantage. But Jörgen had not come to kill. but to prove his innocence, to expose the lie that had destroyed his life. He had already lost everything: his home, his honor, his land. Now all he had left was the determination to confront his enemies and fight for the truth. The battle transformed into a furious dance of two seasoned warriors. The clang of steel clashing against steel echoed across the square like thunderclaps heralding the end of an old era. The Jarl, wielding his heavy sword, unleashed his brute force upon Jörgen, but Jörgen, with his agility and cunning, moved with incredible precision. He skillfully evaded the Jarl's blows, never losing sight of his main objective, to prove that the accusations against him were fabricated. Every thrust, every dodge was a silent message to all present. He was innocent, and the Jarl no longer had the right to rule based on lies and deceit. With one swift movement, Jörgen disarmed the Jarl, knocking the sword from his hand. The leader's weapon clattered loudly to the ground. The Jarl, stripped of his main advantage, tried to regain his balance, but Jörgen pressed him to the ground, holding the tip of his blade to his chest without hesitation. Absolute silence fell upon the square. The villagers, holding their breath, couldn't believe their eyes. Jörgen stood before the man who had ruined his life, yet there was no thirst for blood in his heart. He wanted justice, and justice at that moment did not require violence. "I am innocent," Jörgen declared, his voice deep and firm, echoing across the square. "And the true traitors are not among the outcasts, but among those who rule based on lies and deceit." He looked at the defeated Jarl with an expression of restrained fury, but deep sadness also lingered in his eyes. "You condemned me without hearing my defense. Now, I will tell you the truth." With strength emanating from the depths of his soul, Jörgen recounted the entire truth about the betrayal that never happened, exposing the Jarl as the true orchestrator of all misfortunes. He told the villagers how he had been unjustly treated, how he had been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. He spoke of his desperate struggle for survival, of the unbearable pain, and how the vengeance he had harbored for 3 long years had transformed into something more than a simple desire for retribution. It had become an unquenchable thirst for truth. The Jarl, defeated and humiliated, lowered his head, unable to deny the obvious. He lacked the courage either to fight or to make new accusations against Jörgen. The truth, like a sharp blade, pierced through the web of lies he had spun for years. The villagers, hearing Jörgen's words, finally saw his true face. Not a traitor as they had been led to believe, but a hero who had fallen victim to a vile deception. The clan, shaken by the exposure of their leader and the revealed truth, asked Jörgen for forgiveness. They acknowledged that justice had prevailed and joyfully welcomed his return to his homeland. Jörgen realized that his true journey had come to an end. With a calm gaze, he cast a farewell look at his native settlement. He had achieved the long-awaited forgiveness, but no longer felt the desire to remain among those who had once condemned him and then granted him pardon. Now he was drawn to peace, something that could only be found on a personal journey, far from the dark echoes of days gone by. Jörgen turned away from the village, the burden of past wrongs finally lifting from him. He understood that he had fulfilled his duty, restored his violated honor, but the true path lay where he himself would become the architect of his own destiny, freed from the shackles that had bound him for so long. Redemption was achieved, and he finally felt free. The Scandinavian wind bit at Jörgen's face as he headed toward the horizon. He did not look back. The village, his ancestral home, remained behind as a distant chapter in his life, a chapter marred by betrayal and suffering, but ultimately rewritten by truth. He had reclaimed his honor, freedom, and redemption, but now he needed to move forward, to seek a new life where the shadows of the past had no place. Years of wandering and struggle had tempered his spirit, turning scars into a source of strength. and the thirst for vengeance into an unbearable price. The path ahead was full of uncertainty, but Georgian knew that the most important thing was the ability to forge his own destiny. Vengeance had lost its appeal, for true victory lay in the inner peace he had found. Thus, Jorgen vanished into the boundless, snow-covered expanse of Scandinavia, homeless, yet feeling that for the first time in years, he had found a home within himself. His story of fall and rebirth, marked by struggle, pain, and redemption, eventually transformed into a legend, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, truth and honor can prevail.